Today, we're with Steph Sukow, WeVideo brand ambassador, talking about student podcasting. Hi, Steph. Welcome in.
Hi, it's nice to see you.
It's nice to see you too. Hey, Stu.
How you doing?
Good, good. The weather has definitely turned to fall out here. I'm in California. We had a lot of sunny days in October, and now we've got some nice, dreary fall weather going on out here.
Absolutely. I'm from Illinois, so we definitely, the jackets are out now.
Nice. I'm from Chicago originally, actually, Steph. But in Colorado now, yeah, so fall has come and gone. It's snowy out here.
Yeah. Today we're going to talk all about student podcasting, and I know we've had on the WeVideo side, we've had some activities about podcasting to share your summer or share your favorite thing about seasons. So just to make a connection to that real quick before we dovetail into introducing Steph and getting to hear all about you and your work. So Steph, WeVideo brand ambassador, you've been with us for quite some time using the product for a number of years. I know you did a great session on podcasting for our PD Palooza. And so happy to kind of dive deeper into the podcasting world with you. So just for our viewers who aren't familiar with you or your work, set us up here and then tell us what you teach or what your experience with student podcasting is.
Hi, I'm Steph Sukow, and I am a high school English and speech communication teacher. I also adjunct at the college level, and so I love storytelling. And getting into podcasting as about 8 to 10 years ago, we saw podcasting really explode, and it's so much easier to create podcasts than people realize. And so it's something that I started just being, passionate about technology and storytelling. I started experimenting with students, and I was really surprised at how much students enjoyed the process and how with different platforms and now with WeVideo, it's so easy to produce and make something that sounds professional and make something that students are really proud to share and proud to get their voices out there. And so through all that, I also have 2 different podcasts. One is with my district and celebrating and amplifying teacher stories. And then my husband's a college speech teacher. And so we talk about teaching speech on our own podcast too.
Yeah, awesome. Podcasting has certainly exploded, I would say, even you referenced the last 8 to 10 years, but recently, the last 4 years, I think it's slowly replacing the traditional means and how we've consumed media, news, information. And it's just it seems like every creator out there has a podcast now, right? And so I think it's really smart and important that we bring those kinds of things that exist in the real world into classrooms. So students as they're consuming podcasts, can now become creators of podcasts to understand how media is communicated to others. So do you thinking about that, do you listen to podcasts with students to kind of get them sort of oriented to what podcasting is? How deep do you go into like the art of the podcast before you actually start like making them? Is that something that you practice?
Yeah, I think it's super important that we help our students to understand how to critically listen. And, we talk about reading and writing, but we forget about that listening piece and that communication process. And so helping them to understand and be able to discern, credible and reliable information is something that we all want for our students. And so I really like The Moth is a storytelling network. And so there's some really good teen ones out there, and some of them are YouTube videos, but then we just listen to the audio. But having them hear other people tell their stories is a great way to show them that anybody can really get out there and is with a little bit of organization and a little bit of pre-planning can really create really powerful products. And we're always on the go, and they're always on their phones, or they want to be on their phones. And like, podcasting is a great way to be like, hey, actually, you can record on your phone, or you can use WeVideo and you can record straight into there, which saves them a step. But they can use these tools in a really powerful way.
Yeah, awesome. The Moth, fantastic podcast. Storytelling at the heart of that, right? Which is cool because I love that concept because it's for kids and for adults. They do a lot of really great things. So just before we kind of get any further, what's some recs that you have in the podcasting world that you're listening to right now?
I love The Hidden Brain. So I don't know if you're familiar with NPR and Shankar. I have such a hard time saying his last name, but he's amazing. And Malcolm Gladwell has a really great podcast out there. I actually got a recommendation yesterday. There's another like college arts professor who does a storytelling podcast. So I'm going to start exploring that as well. So we'll see. I mean, there's just so much out there. And so I think if you are someone that travels a lot, or if you like, working out, you can listen to it in so many different places, and it goes with you. And that's the really nice thing about it as well.
Yeah. Sometimes I miss commuting. I work from home because I used to consume a ton of more podcasts than I do now. Just can't seem to build it as a habit in my day anymore. But Stu, what about you? You got any recommendations out there for good ones? Either, ones that are good for kids or ones that are educational or just ones that are entertaining. What are your recs? What do you like consuming these days?
Yeah, I also love The Hidden Brain. Super
Cool.
fascinating, really, really interesting. Lately, I've been listening to Today Explained, just a way to kind of keep up with the news and go a little deeper into various topics that are relevant. That's by Vox Media. And then I've also been listening to Smartless a lot lately. It's more just for entertainment. But I find that, podcasts are great because of the fact that you can sort of consume them in moments like you're saying when you're driving, or other moments where, like, maybe it's not possible to sit down with a book, right? Like I often listen to a podcast when I'm cooking or prepping breakfast, in the morning or out for a walk. So it's a nice way to kind of like multitask and, feed your brain while you're doing other things.
Yeah, absolutely. Very cool. I'm not as I haven't been listening to as many information casts, I guess, is that category of like podcasts that were recommended by the both of you. I consume like Dungeons and Dragons podcasting and like true crime stuff. So it's
then you get to
a little
find
less
your
intellectual.
network.
What's that?
You find your network. And that's something that's fun for kids too, is like, hey, whatever you're interested in, there's a podcast for that. And so you can connect with people and learn, really about whatever it is that you're passionate about.
Yeah. That's a great point. Building community through like a listenership of a podcast, like finding other people that like the same kind of content and forming those like, affinity groups for that kind of thing amongst kids is a really powerful way to encourage how you find people that like the same things as that you do, perhaps, or have the same tastes, which is cool. So to dovetail that into like what you've done with podcasting in an educational context, I guess two questions there. Like one, how have you found it to build it into specific curricular activities, or using it maybe as a replacement for traditional activities in the classroom across certain content areas? So take us there first, then I'll follow up with like, have you, how you might have done this in a more informal way. So let's talk about the formal part of it first. So where have you kind of integrated this into the school curriculum and your classes and that sort of thing?
Absolutely. I think, we want our students to be reading. As an English teacher, we see that the older they get, the less interested they are in enjoying books. And so when we have independent projects, or I'm about to do mini lit circles on, teen themes that then they can talk about, I want them sharing what they're reading. So instead of being siloed reading this independent book that they might love, or maybe they're frustrated with a character, or maybe they're making some sort of connection, whatever that may be, where if we're not talking about it, we're not in community. So that idea of sharing and connecting, and then challenging them to think about the so what. We just read this book by Neil Shusterman. Why, what relevance does that have to today? And it has a ton of relevance, but if we don't talk and explore, then we might not make those connections. Also, when they're talking and sharing, then they're going to find more things that interest them, or they might just pick up a book on their own, which would be my dream. So that podcasting helps them to not only articulate their thoughts or their learning or their connections, but it also gets other people excited and curious to learn.
Yeah. So let's go ahead, Stu. I saw you.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask sort of, well, I'd love to hear more about like some specific projects podcasting projects that you do with students. And then I was also just curious about how students respond to these projects where they're tasked with creating a podcast. Is that something they get excited about? What have you sort of seen about in terms of their reaction or engagement in those projects?
Well, I actually, my first podcast project, I was working with lower level sophomores, so very reluctant readers, students that, didn't always perform the strongest, in their class and among their age group. And so I looked at it as a challenge. I was trying to think of a way that I could help them learn how to, create a claim and how to share their critical thinking. And so why not make it visible, or in this case, make it audible and something that's shareable? And the excitement and the commitment that those kids had to this project was unlike anything I had seen in, any other activity that we had done in class. And so that was such a cool experience. And no, they were not necessarily like New York Times award-winning podcasts, but they were, their passion and their growth was so amazing to be able to witness. And then I had artifacts that I could pass on to other students, in subsequent years, to say, look how excited your peers, last year were about these books, and now you get to read them too. And so it's just such a great way to keep that, almost create a story, but also pass on a legacy of, passion or excitement, or even just a little bit more interest than we've seen before. And so I think the first year I used a tool called Vocaroo, which is literally just a website where you hit record and then they download it. And so we started very, very basic, again, because I didn't know where students would go with this. I didn't know, what would come of it. And I immediately started seeing students saying, well, then I want to make sure I have intro music, or, oh, I know I need to do a commercial, or, they were coming up with the ideas of like, how do we layer this and take this to the next level? And so that's where, a more robust tool becomes really powerful too. And, instead of trying to coordinate the start button with like their iPhone music that they're trying to play, which may or may not be like copyrighted. We run into those problems too. And so really then I started using it across all levels of students that I teach and work with. And, the response is typically the same. There's always one or two people that are like, I don't know tech. And my advice to them is, pair up with a friend, make sure you're in the group with a friend that really knows it. And so then they can work together and they can learn and grow, and it's gone from there. And like I said, I'm gearing up to start a really similar project with my juniors.
Yeah. So how long have you been doing these podcasting projects for? How many years has it been for you in terms of like shifting maybe the way, like, so what, I guess a better question is like, what did it look like before podcasting? And then what was the sort of like, oh, I'm crossing this line into this new experience for students, because you saw the value, you've communicated that very clearly here. But what was that first year? Like you decide, or how'd you reach that conclusion? Like, this project is much better as a podcast than it would be as this thing I was doing before.
Yeah. I'm a comm arts teacher, so I love public speaking, and I think it's important that students have that experience. But again, working with, reluctant readers, that anxiety and apprehension becomes a barrier for them to be able to share their voice. And so by eliminating part of that step, so it was kind of my way initially, like my sneaky way of saying, you're still giving a speech, but you don't realize you're giving a speech. But the art of storytelling and podcasting is is a different medium than actually giving a formal presentation too. And so that communication style is actually a little bit different, and podcasting tends to be a little more conversational. So it's always so surprising the depth of knowledge that they'll share, the personal stories they'll go off on when it comes to opening up those podcasts. I will say, if my time limits on my podcasts are short, because usually we don't have a ton of class time to record and do them, but a lot of students will go over and they'll get really excited, and so my project has evolved now too with the students that I'm about to start working with. We are going to do a 3-part series, so they're practicing not just one podcast, but they're practicing creating that series to tell their stories and elaborate on their stories in different ways.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because that's something that for like many years I've thought that would be a really neat way to implement podcasting projects in the classroom, and I haven't seen that as often. Oftentimes, what I see is a podcast project is like a one-off sort of project, and those can be really neat. But I think this idea of in authentically, right? Like the way that podcasts are produced professionally, it's a series, right? There are multiple episodes. There's maybe a theme or some sort of format that ties it together. But it's not just a single. They're not typically just a single episode that people create. And so you're sort of replicating that in the classroom. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about like how you approach that. What do you see as the benefits of that for students, and sort of how you structure that process of a series of podcasts?
So the one project that I'm about to start with students was inspired by This American Life, which again is a storytelling series, and it focuses on a different person each episode, but it has a very like clear segments and structure. Like there's like an expected plot. And so if you listen to that series, or if you listen to a regular series, a serial podcast, you kind of hear like, here are the beats that the listener is expecting to hear. And so I really wanted my students to not only talk about the book they're reading, but really dig into the connections that they're making. So for this particular assignment, I'm picking young adult literature, so really contemporary literature, which deals with really tough teen topics. And so part of it is them talking about the book. Part of it is focusing on then how does this book relate to their life? And then the third part really is going to ask them to maybe pull in some external research and do some critical thinking on like, what does this problem look like, or the situation look like in the real world? So to do that, to accomplish that, that's why I wanted to make it a series, because if I ask them to talk about all of that in one, maybe the podcast is 15 minutes long and then you lose your listeners. And so if you keep it really tight, you keep it short, people want to hear more. And the art of a good storyteller is really to, again, leave them on a cliffhanger, because there's always another exciting story to tell. And so that's kind of how this project came about. And it's really accessible to do it in really small chunks, as well as like thinking about it from a scheduling time. I get students for 45 minutes a day, and we can accomplish a lot over a week, but it's really, really hard to record a really long, elaborate podcast. But they definitely can hyper focus and create really great products that collectively might be 15 minutes, but really it has really clear, specific focus, and then they're just more engaging and more exciting to listen to too, because it makes us really fast, and we hear something we like, and then we want to hear the next part of the story.
Yeah. That's great. I love that. And like, I just echoes too, like that is not something that I feel like is as common as it should be, especially with like you said, like what the format of a podcast is and how serial it is. Like, I love that idea of connecting it through series and teaching storytelling through that. Especially like you said, like leaving them on a good cliffhanger, something that I always strive to get better at, right? Like as a weaver of stories. But
there are companies making millions of dollars with a good cliffhanger.
That's true.
To
actually,
keep us streaming.
Yeah.
It's a good skill to have.
Yeah, absolutely. Tried and true practice for sure. But that's exciting to hear. And I think so. How many years have you been doing this this project based on that series?
So I'm excited because this is the first time I'm bringing it back since COVID.
Wow.
So it's been a couple of years, and I just haven't taught this level of student, and so now I'm just really pumped and jazzed to see. Now that they're again, every single year we see our students become more and more tech and media savvy, or at least have experience with it, and maybe they don't know what to do with that experience, and so. I know that it's going to be a really fun way to end 2024, and to help these students, like, again, take the things that you're doing socially, let's look at them academically and maybe even professionally, because we know so many jobs are now, like you were saying, Ryan, are remote, and you're working in what feels like a silo, but you're going to be asked to connect to all these people, and digital storytelling in different platforms is a great way for them to be able to be successful in whatever career it is that maybe doesn't even exist right now, that they're imagining for their futures.
Yeah, communication at the heart of that, right? It's communicating your message or your argument or your view or analysis about something, and doing that in the form of a podcast can connect to so many things that future employers might be looking for. And like you said, in a remote work setting or even in an office setting, I think it's still important that these things are highlighted and focused on, especially at the high school level, as they prepare to leave high school and go on to whatever is next for them. So one more question before we get into kind of like seeing if you have some examples or resources. I think this will start us on that path. But okay, so we've got your why, we've got some specific projects. So how is it facilitated? You have resources or scaffolds that you use to kind of bring them along the process. So when you're approaching the design and then the implementation of making the podcast, there's the component around it, which is your content or your subjects, but whatever it is, are you talking about reading, or are you talking about communication? But then there's also the technical components of it, right? Like, how am I actually going to make this thing and bring it to life? So can you take us through how you approach that, what you're doing with students outside of the software that you use, and then bring us into the software and teach us how you sort of teach the kids to create this?
Sure. I think the best place to start is to be a critical consumer. And so I like to start with, again, that bringing in a good story podcast for them to listen to. And then we talk about, like, the structure, like, what did we hear in terms of what was the beginning? How did the intro sound? How did the storyteller lead us into the story? Then we identify, like, main ideas. And again, this is a great skill for any sort of literacy that you're teaching your students as well. And we talk about beginning, middle, end. What does the end look like? What is the outro? And, we start to use some of those basic terms too, and have them outline it and listen to what did they like about it? What made them excited or curious? And so by answering those questions and walking through that process together, we create our own outline or template of, like, hey, this is what I can replicate as well. And as teachers, I highly recommend give your students an outline, make them write out their ideas. A good podcast isn't going to be reading a script, but having a script, especially as they're not as experienced or maybe new to this type of communication, having a script to kind of guide them is a really wonderful way to, like, help your students stay on track and give them things to focus on. Otherwise they're just gonna be like, I don't know, and press play and hope it works out. And so again, start with examples, lead them through the process. Now that I've done it for a couple of years, I have examples that I can pull and show them, and so that's helpful too. But then, looking from there, I think it's important too for teachers to know what content are they actually talking about. Are they doing research? Are they reading a text? Are they, interviewing someone? And so I think once you get the example, then you need to start focusing on, well, what is our end goal? What are we trying to create? And the more you front load those experiences, the easier, the recording part and the producing part can be really, really fast with good investment and preparation before you get to that point. And then, so I think then when you get to that actual producing part, it can go really fast, and just encouraging students to make mistakes. And again, students don't have to create the most professional of products to get through the first one. And so if you series, sure, by the way, they get better and better and they get more comfortable. And so that's when they start getting really creative as well. And with anything you do, if you give your students multiple opportunities to experiment and try, you're going to end up with a really, really strong product.
Yeah, I often sort of think about that, of course, we have students write multiple times over the course of the year. We wouldn't just give them one writing project and then expect them to learn how to write, right? And so it's sort of in a similar vein with other 21st century communication skills, podcasting, media creation, video, et cetera. That one opportunity, they don't have the chance to sort of learn from their mistakes and iterate and grow and then apply that in a new context. And so that's one of the reasons I love this idea of a series of podcasts. And I was just curious, just from a practical standpoint, what's the time frame for that? If you're going to do if we're thinking about the project you talked about of the sort of like the book review, I think is sort of how I'm thinking of that project, and students breaking that into 3 episodes. What's the time frame in total for creating those 3 episodes?
Well, you caught me on a good day because I just mapped this out.
Okay.
It's about 3.5 weeks. So
okay.
They're getting their books, they're reading their books, right around Thanksgiving. And then when we come back, then we're going to hit the ground running with that critical thinking and application piece. And so they'll have about 2 weeks to record and then listen and evaluate their friends' podcasts. So again, looking at recording 2 episodes in a week and then finishing that third one up. And then that last week of school before the winter break, we'll be listening and doing some peer reviews of their podcasts. And hopefully this gives them an idea of like what they could ask for Christmas if they're that excited about reading the next book. And so it's a fun way to end and just make really good connections. And it's a product they can take with them, especially in the holidays. I always say, if you share something with your mom or your grandma, like that you made in school, like that's the only present. Cool. And, and just teaching them that like you can use your, what you've learned to really inspire someone else or make someone else's day and just make your mom proud, which is always great too.
For sure. Do you find for students that have not had opportunities like that? So I guess that's another good question. I mean, at this point, in your school district, is it a common practice as high schooler, as students move up through the grades, that they're engaging with technology, video or otherwise, that like by the time they get with you, they're already primed to, like for me, right? Technology was so novel as a kid, and because of the generation I came up in, like we never had technology in school really. And then even when I was a teacher, it was still very new. And so kids weren't really graduating through elementary and middle school and into high school with it. And I remember the first time I recorded something and like heard my voice back, I was just so, oh my gosh, I hated listening to the sound of my own voice. It takes something like to get used to that, to hearing that, or just like being okay putting yourself out there with your voice or your face right on a video. So I'm interested from your perspective of like, okay, high schoolers in 2024, do they have some of those anxieties about like seeing themselves back or reviewing their work and like hearing their voice and things like that? Or is it just common now because their video is everywhere?
I will say there is always a stigma of hearing yourself speak. Okay. I mean, we still don't when I watch a video of myself giving a speech and I teach other students to do that, it's not always the most fun. But I also think taking away the video element it takes a lot of pressure off them. And I think during COVID, we saw that anxiety with being on a screen and having to see your own face. But when it's audio, again, it's something that's shared and they're doing it in groups. So good podcasts have like we're sitting on a podcast of 3 right now. And I think there's so much power in having a nice, small, but a group of people having a conversation. And so again, I think that once we get past that initial step of like, wait, you want me to do what? Then they're like, oh, okay, I can do this. And so I think it makes that connection. And again, if you practice doing a series of podcasts, by that third one, they have their own dynamics already. They've got their jokes already lined up, and it's really, again, it takes just a little bit of experience to put yourself out there. And I see that shift in them. And it's always a project that students are very engaged and committed to.
In a way, that stress of sharing is also sort of an asset, because like if you
Mm,
know that you're going to be sharing your work with other
mm,
people, I think oftentimes
mm.
people invest a lot more into that project, knowing there are going to be other eyes on it and wanting to do their best work. Um, and you talked a little bit about students having something to share with their family members, over the holidays. I think one of the benefits of media projects is that students have something they've created that they can share with an audience, right? And so I'm just curious how you sort of structure that part of the podcasting project. Maybe you've tried different things, but what are some ways that you've sort of structured students sharing with each other once their podcasts are finished?
I love Padlet, and I think Padlet makes it so easy to pull in multimedia, tools. And so that's having it on a wall where they can then
Mhm.
click on their friends and they can see everybody's names, and then they can even leave comments and
Mm,
like and all the
yeah.
things that they're doing on their social media platforms. They can
Mhm.
recreate and replicate there, but it's also then in a safe space where they're like, okay, I know only this collective group of people are listening to it, and if they choose to share their own outside of our little bubble, our little network, they absolutely can. And a lot of them will, and that's really neat as well.
So are you downloading the MP3, or the students downloading that and then putting it on the Padlet wall or sharing it on social media? Yeah. Okay, cool. Awesome. So for users WeVideo that haven't really gotten into podcasting yet, or didn't really realize that you could do podcasting with WeVideo, do you have an example you can share with us and kind of take our viewers through the different sort of features of the product that would help facilitate podcasting activities?
Absolutely. So here is my most recent example of this is the podcast that I host for my district with a colleague of mine. And it's so easy to edit in WeVideo, and you can kind of see my edits here. We use the same audio music. So again, creating a series, creating a brand. And WeVideo is so awesome because you can go straight into audio here, and your students might get lost in the audio because they love playing around with this, but there's so many great, depending on the theme of your podcast, or you can click on these different inspiring ones, and you can just drop and drag it straight into your podcast timeline. Something I really recommend if you are podcasting with students is to suggest and have them record in one take. You can always edit and cut things out and play with that. And so here you can see, if I go back to my project bin here, I had about a 15-minute video podcast, and my podcast is always 10 minutes or less, or we try to make it that. And so I knew I had to do some cuts, but it was easy to drop and drag in. And again, when I'm ready to make the next podcast in the series, I can just go up to make a copy, and I can make that copy right there, and already kind of have an example template or an outline already established for me. And then two, with WeVideo, it's really easy to do a voiceover. So if you have any intros or outros, or you want to record over anything, it's all as simple as hitting adding media, and then you can narrate right there, and it'll give you that countdown. And so that's really nice too. And once you record your voice, you can edit that as well. And so mixing that in is really key. And when I'm working with students, I will pull up my own examples and again, just show them like, hey, here's my simple timeline, folks. It's not, it's not something elaborate. And yes, of course, there are a few edits along the way, but I keep that at a minimum. So it's a really authentic and natural conversation. And it takes the pressure off of them too, to feel like, when you think about video editing or sound editing, that can get really complex, but it also doesn't need to. And so playing with the audio here, I'll just give you a little snippet. This is our favorite theme song about her experience. Okay, is both in and out of the classroom, teaching robotics and so much more. Listen now to Teach in 10. Okay, so you can hear I have played with the different audio levels, and that's one thing students need to keep in mind with recording too. And so it's as simple as, double clicking, and you can fade in and out. For teachers, and I know students can't do this yet, you can do the reduce the noise,
Yep.
which is really helpful. My classroom, I'm actually really grateful because the heat's been turned on, but the air conditioning is really, really loud in my classroom. So I've had to use that reduce noise feature quite a bit this year to get rid of some of that. But that is something that's there for them as well. And they can do a quick listen, and they can play with those audios and blend it straight into then their actual recording.
Yeah.
Another thing for students too is you can rename these different tracks. And so as someone who might be newer to editing, I think that's really helpful to encourage them to name their tracks to help them to not accidentally delete something or cut something that they really wanted as well.
Yeah.
I love what you said about recording in one take. And I was just going to add that, as far as editing goes, one thing I like to do is pause. Like if I do mess up and I need to start again, is just pause, and then you can kind of use the waveforms to identify where that pause is for the part that you want to cut out. Or even in addition to that, just having like a sticky note on hand, and when you need to start over, just write down the timestamp so you can go back and find that spot. And then you don't have to listen to the whole 15 minutes to go through and cut it. You can just quickly find those parts that you want to cut out.
Yep, absolutely. And the other thing that I was going to mention is this was a video project. And so, but when you go to export it, if you only wanted exported as an MP3 file, so you only would have audio, you could do that. Or, like we're doing here, it's a video cast. So we're having both an audio medium and a video medium in there, and that's possible too. So there's some creative license here with how you want to share the podcast that you've created. So with yours, do you often, with this one specifically, and then maybe can respond to what you have students do typically, this is going to be the same editing experience that students have with podcasting. There's also another experience that we can talk about in just a second. But for this one, you often, or your practice to export this as an MP4 file, so you have the video, or do you do both? You come back in and then export one as an MP4 and one as an MP3? And then how do you have students export their work, or what do you provide for them in that regard?
So for this particular podcast, we were in different buildings. So we used Google Meet, okay, and then we recorded that. And so that's why it was video. But, people get, really nervous when it comes to video, but they're a lot less nervous when it comes to audio. So I always reassure them that we only export it, and I only have students export it as an MP3, cool, especially because sometimes they're recording in a hallway or they're recording in a classroom with multiple people. And so we don't want to accidentally capture someone on film that doesn't want to be on film or isn't a part of the class too. So I typically will just export to that podcast or that MP3. But it's nice to know we have the option too. And a lot of people really like consuming podcasts with video elements. And so it is an option, but it's one that I'm sticking with the MP3s at least for right now.
Nice. Awesome. And then one other thing I wanted to show, if you could close out of this project real fast. Yep. And then hit the drop down for create. Yep. And you can select, we now have the option, this has been in there for a little bit, but you can just select that podcast project, and it will send you right to the narration tool if you're ready to record your voice. If not, you can always cancel and go into the timeline. But what I wanted to highlight here is that it's a more simplified track. So you do still have a video track there, but it's focused on your narration and your audio for the format of a podcast. And then when you go to export again, you still have that choice to export as an MP3 or an MP4.
That's awesome.
Which is really cool. Yeah, it drop you right into the narration feature, so you don't even have to find it, which I find relieving in a way.
Simplifying those steps for students,
Yes,
I think, is so key, and makes them more comfortable, which leads to better products.
For sure. Stu, you are on mute.
Thank you very much. That made me think of something else that people might not be aware of, which, if you don't mind opening the project back up that we were just in, I was thinking about how to find the waveforms on video.
Oh,
for
right.
people if they
Yeah,
want to use those.
absolutely. That's a good call out because we have the different track sizes that you can increase the track size to see the waveform for your video files.
Yeah, so if you click the snowman on the video 1 track, and then, yeah, change track height to large, then you
Yeah,
can
there
see
you
the
go.
waveforms. So that's how people could also sort of use the waveforms for editing with video as well. So you can see those flat lines where there's a pause in conversation.
That's awesome.
Yeah, good tip. I love that. And that's something that I don't feel like, because the default is regular track size. And unless you knew that where to find that, you might not be aware that you can actually see the waveform with video that has audio attached to it. You won't see the waveform if the video has no audio on it. But in a case like this, you're going to see that waveform when you change it to large track size.
Well,
Where can people listen to the podcasts that you create?
Yeah.
It's, on iTunes and all the typical platforms that you listen to podcasts in. And so I've got my Teach in 10 is a community high school district 155 brand. And so it's really for our teachers and our colleagues. But I know like I said, my mom listens. So, you never know who's going to listen. And then I also have a podcast called Teach Speech. So
Nice. And if you want, we can we'll put those down in the description for all of you if you want to take a listen to Steph's podcasts. And I know you're going to share some resources. You have some resources to share, so those will be down in the description as well on how to facilitate student podcasting projects. As we wrap up here, I know I talked about your general favorite podcasts, or we talked about like listening to podcasts that are produced in the real world outside of the classroom. But do you have an education technology specific podcast that you listen to, or is there one? Because I know that is an actual genre of podcasts nowadays. Do you have one that you would recommend to folks, to teachers specifically? Like, I want to learn more about ed tech. I want to learn about all the tools out there. I want to continue these kinds of conversations. Do you have one that you are particularly keen to listen to these days?
there are so many, but Cult of Pedagogy is a really good one. I really like Dave Burgess's podcast as well, and he has a lot of authors that are sharing great things too. So definitely, I think it's great just to listen, or pick one episode that appeals to you and learn something new.
Yeah, fantastic. I love that. I will go. You said Cult of Pedagogy, right? Was that the one? Yeah, I will. I've only listened briefly to that one. I've been meaning to get more of part of my regular routine. It just seems to never be able to do that. But it's a great suggestion. And yeah, thank you for coming on and sharing all of your knowledge about student podcasting. And I'm really excited for you that you're bringing back a project that sounds like it was super meaningful to you in the past iteration of it. And we'd love to see some examples. So if you have, when you finish that, if you share some of your student examples, we can help. I'd love to see that. I'd love to hear it when you're finished with it. So that would be great if you're up for that, or if your students are up for that, I should say.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it was great chatting with you and learning even more about how I can use this with my students in the coming weeks here.
Yeah.
This is really great. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, Steph. Just really tons of great information about implementing podcasting projects in the classroom. So really appreciate you joining us on the show.
Yeah, thank you. Bye, Stu. Bye, Ryan.
All right. Take care, Steph. Thank you so much. And for everyone else out there, we have a quick tips that come to you live every Tuesday. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click that notification bell so you get information about when every piece of content on our YouTube channel drops. So you can watch quick tips every Tuesday, catch live webinars that we rerun on our page, check out all of Stu's fun content that he puts out about our assignment ideas library, and many, many more things. We'll see you next Tuesday right here on Quick Tips. But until then, happy creating, everybody. Bye now.
Bye.